mini-series, Great American Sacred Texts. This has been a series in which we have explored the ways in which Jewish ideas and ideals have been interspersed into the fabric of this country since its founding in many of the seminal documents that we come to know as defining democracy. And it's been part of our work to promote civic engagement in our community by seeing the connection between our Jewish texts and our foundational texts in America and how democracy has evolved. Now, that is not just true for speeches and for treatises, but it is also true that Jewish ideas and Jewish people have found their way into the fabric of our Great American Songbook, the soundtrack of our nation in many ways. And we are so honored to have our senior rabbi, Angela Buchdahl, leading us in this culminating session. So I'll pass it to Rabbi Buchdahl. Thank you.
So glad to be with you in this warm space on this cold night. And those of you who are joining online, I'm grateful that you're here too. And we can see you, so we know you're here. I feel like I have to start with a disclaimer. This is not going to be the American Songbook. We're going to look at two songs. But because I am not, for a person who sings, I am not like a big American Songbook kind of person. I just don't actually know enough. So I just thought I would do a kind of a closer read of two texts that would be kind of interesting as sort of the template for talking about some of these ideas. But to start, I love the premise of this whole series, which has been taking American texts and treating them as scripture, basically as sacred text. And if you look up what scripture is in the dictionary, it will often just say Christian text, which is kind of interesting as the first, or it sometimes say a sacred text from a religious community. But it also says something that's attributed to a higher power in some way. So already the premise of taking texts that we have in our American culture and calling them scripture is already kind of an audacious thing, but it's saying in some ways that the values behind it, the inspiration behind it, and in some ways it's easier to say this as a Reformed Jew, that it is divinely inspired in some way, or it aspires to values of something that we think of as in some ways godly, ways of dignity of every human being, values of justice, values of uplifting, the value of the pursuit of happiness for all peoples. So in many ways, I think that those are divine tasks. And I think as Reformed Jews who think that of our Torah, generally speaking, we think of the Torah as written by human hand, but divinely inspired. It's easier to imagine that actually there could be texts that are written even in the last 100 or 200 years that are scripture in a way, if they carry that kind of resonance and aspiration of sort of some kind of divine calling. So I would say a few things that make for American scripture. It incorporates fundamental American values of liberty, equality, and justice. Those also would make them Jewish scriptures. It is employed to inspire citizens. And I think this is another important piece, which is it has to be old enough to feel like it has, that it's been kind of canonized or codified. Because I think that one of the things we talk about a lot is when we talk about Jewish melodies, actually, we have a category of melodies called Sinai melodies, which means from Sinai. Now, we don't really think that they're actually from Sinai from 3,000 years ago, but you can't get the designation of Sinai, of being a from Sinai melody, unless it can be traced at least back to the 9th century. So we know that there are melodies that are at least 1,000 years old. Anything that's 1,000 years or older, we just call it from Sinai, and which is pretty great. And with the American Songbook, I just had a really interesting conversation right before we started. We were like, there are great songs that have been written in the 70s and 80s, and like I love all the songs from Wicked, for example. A bunch of us are, but those don't get to be, in some ways, I think the American Songbook is closed. I think it came from a certain era, and in some ways it had to have been an era that we've already gotten a chance to have some perspective on, that is past, and then it gets codified. Maybe this era will get to be something else. But I also think that scripture in some way has to have a little bit of that ancient quality. It helps actually if everyone who wrote them is dead. I just think that just makes it feel a little bit more sacred. You can't argue with them about what did you think it meant. You get to decide. That's also something about Scripture, is that there's something about Scripture is it's continually being revealed. And if the person who authored it is no longer there, then you get to be part of the revelation process. So I think that that's also part of what I think is important for Scripture. So it just is an opening salve to throw out, because I think this is about conversation. And if you are watching online, I would love to encourage you to use the chat function so that you can read it, but also because apparently the chat function is where all of the really great texts are being generated for the midrash that you've all made outside, from the text with the kind of the text in the middle, the sacred text in the middle, and then the commentaries on the side. So I really encourage you to write from where you are. And if you're in the room, I would ask that if you're seated all by yourself, that you actually, when I ask you this question, you move to be next to someone you could speak to, because a couple of different times I might actually to ask you to discuss, and like I'm going to do right now, and just for a minute, and you need to have someone you could discuss with. So first, I would ask you to turn to the person, and if you don't like live together or know each other, introduce yourself, please. And I would ask you to share one text that you think of as sacred scripture, an American scripture. So it might be one of the ones you've studied in part of this series, or it might be something else, and why you think it should count as scripture. So take a minute and discuss. I'd love to bring you back. Marina, I might turn to you in a minute and ask you if there are any that you might read a couple from there. But could I first start with anyone in the room? Does anyone have one that they want to share and why they thought of it as an American scripture, whatever your choice was? Anyone brave enough to ask? Oh, yeah, and we're going to come around. Thank you, Andrew. We've got. Okay, wait, hold on. Oh, Andrew, right in front of you. Mm-hmm. Oh, it has to be for the people who are online that they can't hear without a microphone.
Okay, I'll be the brave one. I thought of the Gettysburg Address. I love Lincoln with all his faults. I love him. And that is seminal to me. That's very important in our country.
Beautiful. Is there one value from it that you feel like it inspires for us to think about?
Well, he talks about what this country is supposed to be and to which we aspire.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. We did also down here too.
So we thought it was supposed to be a song, and within the restrictions of being old, which is what you said, so it took out all of this Peter, Paul and Mary and Leonard Cohen stuff. So we thought of Harold Arlen's Over the Rainbow.
Oh, very nice.
Because it was about the promised land.
Spoiler alert,
and
that's
hope.
one of the two we're doing,
Oh, no.
yes. So, okay, yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, you get a door
I
prize.
didn't care about time, and for me, it's American Pie.
Oh, nice. Interesting.
It's just
Can
the
you
song for the age, and he's dead, and I learned it in 5th grade in music class, and we actually had a contest from the music teacher. What does it mean? Because it's so enigmatic. You have no idea. I mean, it leaves so much room for interpretation. So
I love it.
yeah.
Good scripture, by the way, leaves lots of room for interpretation. I think that's right. And by the way, what I meant, just to be clear, I meant that the American Songbook, the way we think of the American Songbook, which is kind of a term we use for kind of a particular period, I think of that as somewhat closed. But I don't mean that, like, American scripture that's music, it would be closed. Paula.
So I was thinking of Woody Guthrie, This Land Is Your Land.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
This Land Is Your Land. Very good. Maybe one value that you hear from that song that you feel like is part of what makes it feel sacred in some way.
So it's the shared ownership and siblingship that we're sharing as part of being
I like that.
Americans.
Shared ownership. Yes. Beautiful.
I was thinking of Blowing in the Wind
Mm.
and, peace. And I think so many of these songs, it's from a certain period. And for many of us, that was a time where the songs really spoke to all the values or all the things that we thought were wrong with the with the country.
Right. But so in some ways, it was voicing an aspiration for something different. Beautiful. Last one, Morris.
Lincoln's second inaugural, in which he speaks to the phrases with malice toward none, with charity for all.
Beautiful.
And it's a vision of recreating the basis on which the nation should be recreated in the depths of the war.
Beautiful.
So my colleagues on either side went with the Gettysburg Address.
Uh-huh.
I got
That
the
was a
mic.
very popular one. Marina, would you give us one or two from the online folks?
Yeah, so actually, Ed Sasla is unmuted and wants to say something.
Okay. We're always happy to hear from Ed.
I was thinking, because you said songs, right? And I was thinking of Paul Simon's American Tune, just because I'm in a little bit of a nervous mood these days.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ed. Good to see you. And Marina, is there anyone else from that you want to share? One more from...
I have Bridge Over Troubled Waters.
Oh, that's good too.
And that's all I have right now.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. And I hope that you shared with each other. So I was first asking just about what Scripture is, but now we're going to turn to music and what music does to Scripture. So what happens when you actually set Scripture to a melody? What does it do? And I'm actually asking that not just as a rhetorical question. And just to make it less awkward, you can just answer and I'll repeat it in the microphone so people can hear. But what happens when you take a piece of text and you set it to music? What does it do? Or what is possible when you set something to music that can happen? It's more uplifting. Beautiful. What else? I'm sorry? You remember it. Great. Most of us cannot say past the first line of the Gettysburg Address, but you probably know many verses to all the songs that you just told me about, right? Because there's something about how it becomes more memorable when we add the melody to it. What else? It becomes a shared experience. Beautiful. So you almost, so many of these songs are things that you actually shared with others. So it actually, melodies and Scripture create community. Beautiful, especially when there's a melody attached. Yes? It imparts emotion, right? So you actually can feel, even though words often have emotion as well, as we know from emails, you can often misinterpret emotion if you only have the words. When you have it sung, you really feel it differently. And by the way, different artists in different times can actually create very different emotions just the way they sing a song. I was asked to sing a song at a funeral this morning, which is why I'm dressed in my funeral dress, and it was from Rent, and I was thinking about how I would sing that very different at a cabaret than the way I sang it at a funeral today. And so you can actually change the emotion of the very same song and melody with the intention you put into it. Beautiful. So melody and song takes Scripture, and I would offer it kind of turns Scripture into prayer. And can do the things that prayer can do, which is inspire, aspire, lift us up, transcend, communicate something deep and emotional, create community, all the things that you just said. And I think that it also gives us beauty. And now I would say something about aesthetics and beauty. It is one of those things that I think growing up, I kind of was taught that somehow you were supposed to be a little bit suspicious of caring too much about anything's beauty, except for nature. Nature was okay to admire the beauty of nature. But if you admired like human beauty or the beauty of a building or a sanctuary, or even like the way something sounded, in some ways I almost worried that it was a little bit superficial. I remember when I was applying for Central Synagogue to be the cantor here many years ago, I asked people why they love Central, and the answer from so many people was, we love our sanctuary. And I remember thinking, that doesn't seem like a very good answer. It's like, it just seemed like, except I will tell you, once I started singing in that sanctuary, I was like, okay, actually there is a reason that aesthetic beauty is elevating. Why people who actually wanted to build a house for God, if they could, built extremely beautiful, awe-inspiring sanctuaries, because it can actually do something to us. So something about aesthetic beauty matters when we're trying to create a sense of transcendence. And then, of course, oral beauty, the way something sounds. I don't want to be a snob about it, but it really matters if someone has, and it's not just about a pretty voice or a nice voice, but when people have emotion in their voice, or when they have a certain ability to actually communicate with their voice on a high level, it really does feel different. It's elevated in some way. When I listen to Dan Mutlu sing, I'm like, there is God in that, right? And so you can feel that sense of elevation from the aesthetics of music, which transforms a piece of scripture into something even more transformative. So we're going to take a look at just two songs I thought we kind of would like look at together from the American Songbook. America the Beautiful, that's the first one. Does anybody know who wrote it? Yeah? You do? Winnie? Oh, that's great. Okay, so first of all, it seems a little unfair because since Winnie went to Wellesley, and is like such a Wellesley fan, of course you would know that. But did anyone else know it? Okay, good. The reason why, and the other Wellesley graduate also raised her hands. Thanks, Susan. Okay, so the reason why I asked that is because there is this feeling that most people actually don't know who wrote it, and that is part of what makes it Sinai for America, meaning like, I don't know, Jewish music is not the only music that in some ways it becomes more sacred when we no longer know who wrote it, because then it could actually feel like it's just traditional, like it can be given that category. But yes, Kathy Bates wrote it. She wrote it, does anyone know when she wrote it? That's like a bonus question, Winnie. Yes, very, very good. So she first wrote it in 1893, but then she re-edited it several times. It was published for the first time as a poem in 1911. So in some ways, it kind of like, it was a couple of decades in the making with little bits of changes along the way. And I want to give you a little bit of context of the time in which she was writing it. She was writing it when she was traveling as a young professor from Wellesley, and she was going to Colorado Springs to do a visiting professorship in Colorado. So you just have to remember that it was only in 1890 that they got rid of the part of the map in the west where Colorado was, which was called frontier, right? So they basically just called all that stuff the Wild West. They just called it the frontier. And they only actually started putting names on that map in a real way at about the time that she was traveling over there. So just think about that when you think about what it means to, for her, first of all, to make that trip, to see parts of the country that were really deeply untouched at the time. And that she was, traveling by train. So it was railroads and telegraphs were also connecting this and uniting this fledgling nation that was coming together. So when you think about that, when she says from sea to shining sea, it really takes on a different resonance when you think about a country that really wasn't from sea to shining sea, like right before she wrote it. And so she was marveling at this idea that you could basically go from sea to sea, that it was one country, that it was America, that it was beautiful. And she describes this journey, including the Purple Mountain Majesties, which was specifically when she saw Pikes Peak. Alabaster City's gleam. These were when Chicago had the World's Fair, and they built up all of these huge white buildings that she saw that was also stupendous and beautiful. And so it was a song of a new America. And it wasn't just about the new America in terms of like the geographic sense of newness of this big country, but also it was a time of turmoil. They were just coming out of the Gilded Age and moving into more progressivism. And we can assume Kathy was quite progressive herself. She was likely a lesbian. She had a longtime housemate named Catherine Coleman. She was a big advocate for social justice through the settlement house movement, and she was a suffragist on top of all of that. So she really saw that this was a time for a change in the country from sort of this very kind of conservative time where actually McKinley, who was the most conservative president of America at that time, was assassinated in 1901, and then he was replaced by Teddy Roosevelt, who was quite progressive. So this was like a time of like massive change in America. both geographic, political, social, in all these different ways. So she was writing this song at that time. So now I'd love for us to look at the words. Can we put them on the screen? Or that's me, I guess I have this clicker. Yeah. Oh, 1 second. So that's obviously pretty familiar words right there. But so now when you look at this, I'm sorry that I can't put both of these up at the same time, but when you look at these words and you have a little bit of the context of when Kathy Bates wrote this song, what do you feel like you see are some of the values and aspirations that she is expressing in this? And just and for a moment, just take a look at these words. I'm going to give you a little bit of time with these, and then I'm going to flip you to the next, and then I'm going to invite you to share with your seated mate. I know. I'm sorry. Can we click that box off so we can see the words? And then I'll turn to the next one also. Can you read these? Okay, so just take a couple of minutes with the person next to you, and I can kind of go back and forth between these two verses. I'm sorry, I don't have an ability to put them both up on the same time. But and think about what are, if you were to read this as scripture, as I'm asking you to do, what would you say are some of the values that that she is trying to convey? So that I think I'll give you one more time with this one, but most of you know the first verse. So I'll turn it to the second one. Okay, so take a moment and discuss. Okay, so if I were to ask, what do we think are some of the values that here? Again, we'll do this kind of popcorn where if you'll raise your hand, you can say it, and I'll just kind of repeat it so people can hear. So we're not jumping around too much with the microphone, but you know, it doesn't have to be like enormous, but there's some ones that are pretty obvious. What do you think? Yes, Ron. Yes, more than self, their country love. And that sentiment has been summed up in many ways, not what you can do for what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. But the sense of like, each of us have to serve in some way, that we have to be willing to also in times make sacrifices for our country. Beautiful. What else? So Barbara is surprised by how much God there is. Yes, God makes, refines the gold, and God sheds God's grace on thee. And yeah, I think actually God shows up in all of the verses, right? In the first 1, 2, why is that not working? Oops. Yeah. I wanted to go back to this one. Yeah. This has a mind of its own. God is, God is on is in every one. There was a deep sense that this was a godly country, and one nation under God, and in God we trust. There was a lot of God speak, but yes, so there's a lot of God in there. That adds to this sense of scripture. Yeah, Freeman. Right, uphold our democracy. The second verse is talking about, we're not perfect, and actually we want to hold up this sense. I'm sorry, can we click out the boxes, because then I can't read the text. Thank you so much. So when it says, like, mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law, it's a real sense that we actually have to really maintain a sense of, like, upholding this sense of liberty and law and self-control, which is also, I think, quite amazing as well. Good. Another value that you see. Yes? God is the reason and the end all. So that God is the be-all, end-all of what America is. I mean, I think that there is a mixture, both of what God does and what we have to do. I would push us to say that, yes, God does all of these things, and God, of course, created all the beautiful natural beauty, and yet there's also, we have to sacrifice, and we have to follow the laws. And alabaster cities gleam. That's not a God-made beauty. That's actually man-made beauty. So I think that there is some combination here, both of our partnership with God in making America beautiful or making America what we aspire for it to be. And I actually think that that's a very Jewish idea as well, that we are not actually just saying it's all in the hands of God, nor do we think it's all in our hands. It is some partnership, some covenantal partnership in which God is doing God's part and we have to do our part. So I think that's very much in this text. Yeah, Jules. Brotherhood. Okay, good. And so obviously it was in very male language, even though it was written by a woman who was a lesbian who went to a feminist all women's college, but she still said brotherhood because it was 1890 when she wrote it. And so yes, but that sense that we are all together, and that is particularly profound when you think about there was a rise in sort of nativism at this time, as there was actually a lot of immigration, including Jewish immigration from the 1890s into the early 1900s, and actually there was a lot of rejection of foreigners coming in and Jews. So the sense of kind of calling us all part of one brotherhood was actually a strong aspiration and statement, I think, that she was trying to make. Beautiful. Yes. Beautiful. So Jill was talking about taking her own cross-country trip and feeling that sense of majesty and beauty. And especially, I think, if you see majesty and beauty that is not where you are from, it can kind of take your breath away because you're used to certain things and you can actually become accustomed to them, but then you see a different landscape and suddenly it's like you see it anew, and it's quite amazing. Yes, in the back. Oh, that is a really important critique. So the critique being that, first of all, you aren't the only one. It says right here in the chat box, I have a central friend who sees this mostly as a Christian song. So you see this as a white Christian song with a sort of manifest destiny plowing over everybody who was in that land before. So sea to shining sea, it takes on a very different view when you actually are ignoring who was moved off the land for us to kind of create that frontier as if there was no one there. I think that's really, really important for us to remember. And by the way, I think that all scriptures are written from a particular perspective in which you can see the beauty and aspiration of your dream and your destiny, and sometimes that is with complete ignorance or willful blindness to those for who you have to perhaps step over or move out of the way in order for that to be present. So I think that's a really important, sobering reminder. Yes. 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 And Linda, you're right, that this wasn't the national anthem, but did you know that it was petitioned, many, many people petitioned for this to become the national anthem in place of Star Spangled Banner. Beautiful. May God thy gold refine. I remember that is actually a line that she changed. The first time she wrote the line in 1893, I wrote down, she had it as, till selfish gain no longer stain the banner of the free. And she, yeah, so maybe that would address more some of the issues before, and then I think maybe that was just way too controversial, and so she just changed it to all success be nobleness and every gain divine. But so it is interesting to think about how she probably did grapple with more before that. Yes. Right. So, it was, I think that's a very good point. And I think she is grappling with her tension about what she is aspiring for America to be, where she probably sees that it is. But I think that is in many ways what sacred text is. It is an aspiration for something that you hope that we can get to, even if we are not quite there yet. And she saw it from that particular perspective. So Jewish values, are there specific Jewish values besides the one that we saw? Yes.
Yeah, I think our duty to be kind.
Our duty to be kind. Okay, I love that. Let's make that a fundamental. To become. Oh, even better. Okay. Our duty to become. Do you see that in every verse, basically? Yes. I think that's beautiful. So one of God's names in the Torah is, I will be what I will be. That essentially the idea of becoming is maybe the most godly pursuit we can have. That we have to we are becoming greater than we are before, that there's some sense that aspiration, and this sense that America, I think one of the things we did really feel was this sense that we can be more than we were before that, so that there's some sense of agency to make change, to be something different. So becoming is really very powerful as a Jewish value. Yes, beautiful. So that the idea that we are able to move forward and not be dimmed by human tears, even if we've had a lot of oppression and, we could say the lachrymose view of Jewish history, but we have somehow not allowed that to dim us. Yes, Robert? Beautiful. So a Jewish value of coming through of kindness and grace, and actually contrasting that to Star Spangled Banner, which is much more militaristic and violent in a way almost. And then instead, this is about kind of natural beauty and kindness and grace, and I think that's very beautiful. One more, yeah. Love mercy, yes, that's very Jewish. A God of mercy, as we say that every time we have a funeral, for example, but it's a God of mercy is really the way we like to see it, God. I think that there are a couple of other, this is about becoming in a sense, but there's a messianic vision almost of like who we are going to be, this like alabaster cities. It's like almost like John Winthrop's City on a Hill, being a light unto nations. There is something about that that's very aspirational and messianic in a way. Service to others, which we kind of talked about earlier about it. And I think this idea that natural beauty is tied to moral beauty is a very Jewish idea. And we might not always think about that, but that's what I was talking about with the aesthetics. Like, we actually really believe, and Jews have a long history of this, of seeing that natural beauty makes us want to aspire to moral beauty. We see that in the Song of Songs, which is the Hebrew love poetry, which talks about beauty as something that actually makes us, the beauty and the morality are connected in biblical consciousness. And of course, the Garden of Eden is very beautiful and lush, and it's where we gain our understanding of good and evil and morality. So, and of course, Israel is described as a beautiful land with milk and honey. So this idea that a place is beautiful is connected to a sense that it is a moral place. With that in mind, I wanted to play one version of America the Beautiful that I think really plays on this idea of beauty, and I'm just curious like what it stirs up when you hear it. But first, as the background, I want to say that songs can be completely different depending on how you hear the song and who's singing it and when they sing it and how they sing it. So I'm just curious, when you think of America the Beautiful, who do you hear singing it? Like, what's the version that you hear? Freeman. Ray Charles. Okay, great. I love that you said that. Do you remember when you first heard it? So imagine, and I think it not only gave it such life, it changed the feeling of it completely. So think about a song that was written for the first time in 1893 by a white woman who traveled across the country and was an academic, right? And then it was set to music by a church organist, Sam Ward, I think was his name, Samuel Ward, I'm sorry. And so it had kind of that church hymn feel because it was written by a church organist. And then Ray Charles comes, and he actually sings it the first time, I think it was in 1972, which is the year that I was born, and it was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and he actually started with the third verse, in liberating strife, oh beautiful for heroes proved, who more than self their country loved. So think about a black man in 52 years ago singing this song. He sang it apparently on the Dick Cavett show for the first time. And he sang it starting with this third verse. And it kind of changes your whole view of America, America the Beautiful, when you imagine him singing this song. Just so different. It changes the whole context of the song from the first time you heard it. I'm really glad you brought that one up. I don't know if anyone else has a different person that they think of, but that, of course, is the version that I'm going to play for you. But I also... I actually did see the video from the Dick Cavett show, and I thought I could show you that one. But it was, but because I wanted to talk about this idea of moral beauty connected to aesthetic beauty, I'm going to show you a video that is Ray Charles's voice. But this particular video was made for the 50th anniversary of when Ray Charles sang it on the Dick Cavett show. So That's this one coming up. Here we go. There we go. Thank you. I'm glad, Linda, you made me. We obviously had to do that. So, what did that stir for you, hearing that particular version, hearing it with that video, which clearly was, designed for a particular reason? So. Oh, beautiful. Feeling down, and this gives me some hope. I agree. You see this, and part of what you cannot help but see, because it was both, like, it was cities, and it was landscapes, and it was mountains, and it was skyscrapers, and it was also human beings of every color that America has, and it kind of reminded you, because we see too much that's so ugly, we are reminded that America is beautiful and amazing, and it is certainly not perfect, but it is actually pretty incredible. So I love that that is the way you feel. Yes, Nancy. Oh, his voice. Oh, I love that. You hear his voice and you just feel proud that he's American, that you're American. You get to be connected. We're brothers. We're in brotherhood together. It just stirs your soul. He has just that kind of a voice. Beautiful. What moves her is that this wonderful man never saw any of it. You think he didn't see much of the country, or you mean that, like, oh, of course. You're totally right. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Well, so what does it mean to be able to see that beauty, even if you were literally not able to see? And yet he saw it. And in some ways, he could see it deeper than all of us, because he had to see it with the senses that we ignore all the time. That's so beautiful. And I should have remembered that, Paula. Saw it with his heart, yeah. Beautiful. So Paula's just saying that the context of this is so striking, because if you imagine a time when the country was down, it was polarized, we were at war, people were unhappy about it, there was protesting. Maybe we know something about what that feels like right now. And to be reminded, for him to be able to lift up what was still so beautiful. And also, this is a man who was singing this in 1972, who probably much of his life also experienced what was really ugly about America from a racial perspective, and yet could still say this and aspire for this and make us believe it. That's also, I think, something that scripture that is sung or a prayer can make us feel, even when we're not sure we believe it. It restores faith in some beautiful way. Yeah, Freeman.
Well, he turns it into a spiritual.
Yes. Yes, he quite literally does. The way his arrangement of it becomes basically a gospel song. Yes, a spiritual. Which brings us back to God. Great. So I think that we could all argue that there was godliness just in his pure, raw talent and voice. We feel it. Then there's godliness in his turning the song into a spiritual, like literally feeling, and it feels like a prayerful, spiritual gospel song. So he really did turn that into scripture and sung scripture, which is so beautiful. Yeah. Wow. So Barbara was just saying that that growing up in the 60s and from the family that I'm going to guess you were coming from, anything patriotic was sort of like you were allergic to it, didn't feel right, and it wasn't really until you heard this in 1972 that in some ways, especially coming from him particularly, that you could kind of reclaim that sense of taking a patriotic song and loving America in some way and being able to own that. One of the things that I've learned from a speech coach is she said, Angela, the message you're going to get across, it's only 7% of it comes from the text that you are actually reading, which is really very deflating when I spend like 2 months on my high holiday sermon or something. So that's only 7%. So what's 38% of it? Do you know? 38% of it is the heard experience, meaning how I say the words. And that's everything about like the timbre of my voice. You know what it's like? If you speak in a monotone, you go to sleep, and it does not matter what brilliant thing is coming out of my mouth, you cannot listen. Okay, so 38% of this is the way it sounds to you. But that still leaves 55% of the experience of anything I present to you, a song or a sermon, is not about the words, and it's not about how I say it. So what is the other 55%? It's actually what I would call the embodied visual experience of it. She gives other words to it, but essentially it's everything from eye contact, my body language. What do you hear when I'm kind of going like this versus if I talk to you like this the entire time? And what if I said, I'm so happy to be here with you all. It's so great. Like I would really love, it doesn't matter what I'm saying. You don't believe it. So it's body language, it's eye contact, but it's also who I am. So with Ray Charles singing that song, 7% of it was the words. The words, we all just studied the words. It was not about the words. Now, probably more than 38% in his category was about the way it sounded, because he had a sense that it was so soulful. But a huge part of this was who he was, what he embodied, we knew he had lived through, and for him to sing that song in 1972, in the middle of the war, and starting with the third verse, and talking about sacrifice for this country, and you're just suddenly like, yes! And it's like that's what made it a song. That's why they make 50th anniversary videos, because it was really like a cultural moment when he sang that song on a TV show. And so I think that is actually something for us to consider when we think about Scripture, and that Scripture is really only one piece of this, and then you have to actually see the way that Scripture is actually embodied and put out into the world, and who is the messenger. All of those things vastly change the way we hear, and it can absorb whatever that message is. Any other thoughts before I move to, yes? Beautiful. So yeah, because he's blind, but also I think most performers have to learn it, but he really clearly took it in, and I think that knowing that in some ways he was describing beauty that he would have to picture in a different way than the way you and I pictured it, I think changes the way we think about it. Yeah. Beautiful. So yes, the video with the images kind of moving us from one place to another, we got to kind of take this ride with him, and yeah. I remember when I was a senior in high school, I was picked for one of these like leadership things where they took 2 kids from every state and they brought us to Washington, D.C., and it was the first time I ever came to Washington, D.C., and they put like the 100 of us in a room, and I would just call it like patriotic indoctrination. It was really great. I loved it. And one of the things they did was they played this song, which now has become kind of tainted for me, but it was that song, I like to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. But they did that, and they showed these unbelievable, beautiful pictures of America, most places I'd never visited, and they put it on this giant screen, and I was just like weeping. I was like, I love America. Anyway, it makes a difference how they put all this stuff together. Okay, so we're going to just move to the next piece, which was Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and just a little piece of interesting trivia. I think everyone's been thinking about this recently. In case you haven't seen Wicked yet, you should. But it's kind of made us all think about Wizard of Oz again. When they made this musical, which was in 1939, I think you all probably know that it was the first movie, I think, in Technicolor. So it was really quite like an event. And for me, obviously, I did not see it in 1939. But back in the days when you actually had to watch TV when the show was on, and they put Somewhere Over the Rainbow, they put Wizard of Oz on once a year. It was like an event. Like I would have my friends over, we would do a sleepover, we would get like dressed up for it, we would have popcorn. It was like the Wizard of Oz night, and it was really, really very exciting. Anyway, when they were doing an advanced screening, when they were still editing this movie down, there was a producer, an MGM executive, who said, we have to remove Over the Rainbow because it really slows down the film. Can you imagine if they cut it? So an associate producer named Arthur Freed stepped in, and he went right to the studio head, who was Louis Mayer. There was a lot of different Jews involved with this movie. And he said, either the song stays or I go. And so which Mayer replied, All right, let the boys have the damn song. Put it back in, it can't hurt. Anyway, so of course, now we can't imagine that movie without that kind of iconic song. As you might know, it was written by Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg. These were two Tin Pan Alley Jewish composers, meaning there was like a period of time where these like kind of like Jewish composers were like writing in back alleys and like didn't have a lot of fame, but they were writing this amazing music. Harold Arlen was the son of, I think it was Harold Arlen or it was Yip. One of the two of them was the son of a cantor, by the way. And in 2001, Over the Rainbow was literally voted the greatest song of the 20th century by the National Endowment for the Arts, which is pretty high praise for this song. Why do you think this song had such appeal? I'm just curious. Like it's like a great song, but why was it like the song? What's that, Morris? Oh, because of the Great Depression. Interesting. So like so then it was like an aspiration for something. Yeah, maybe that was part of it. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Wow. That really changes the way. I hadn't thought about that, but if you think of these two Jewish composers writing in 1939, or they probably wrote it a little bit before that. And yes, when the storm clouds, rumble and whatever, what are those? Gather far across the sea. Yeah. Heaven opens another door or something, right? Isn't that what that next line is? But something like that, basically. And then you imagine that there could be a place where you can be safe and free. It really does actually totally change the way you think about that song if you think of it as two Jews right before the war. Yeah, Jules. Beautiful. So if the rainbow comes out of the flood and is basically God's promise and covenant to us that we're not going to be destroyed like that again, then the rainbow also takes on a whole nother Jewish meaning of like a promise that like after this terrible Holocaust, this won't happen again. I'm going to put that rainbow as my promise. Susan. Okay, it did not hurt. Who was singing the song? Judy Garland made the song. She was iconic and she made the song. It was, of course, where it was placed in the movie. It's what anyone who like kind of is in the film industry or show industry, or theater industry, you have to have the I Want song. This was the I Want song. Every film has to have that thing where you like really feel the longing of their protagonist. This is her longing. And it was also maybe about a young person who is like trying to grow up and always feels kind of the stricture of like being at home and needing to kind of branch out and become her own person. So there were lots of different ways to relate to this song. I thought we would do just a couple of little clips because I do think the song feels very different depending on how you hear it and who does it, as we talked about before. So this one is, no, we're not going to do that one. A little bit of this one. I love this version. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to discuss one last time with the person next to you. Try to refrain from, I like this version, I don't like this version. We could easily do that. Or I like this one best, or I like this one better. I'd ask you more to answer the question, what is the message of the song you get from, you could go all three versions I shared, the Dorothy, the Josh Groban, with the crystal chandeliers, and Israel, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but the Hawaiian version, I call it. And just how does this song with the same words convey a very different, like what do you think is the primary thing that this scripture, this sung scripture is conveying depending on the messenger and the way it's done? Just take 2 minutes. We're not gonna take a lot of time because we're running out of time, but just invite you to speak amongst yourself for a moment and then, okay, I'm gonna bring you back in for a moment and just, I'm curious if anyone wants to share maybe a thought about like how they heard the song differently in different ways or what they thought the message was differently. All right, Paula, you're getting pointed to.
So I had this amazing feeling with Israel.
Uh-huh.
That he's there. He's at the other end of the rainbow.
Ooh, very nice. The feeling with Israel was he was there. He was on the other side of the rainbow. I mean, he is living in Hawaii. So yeah, but that's beautiful. All right. So, I mean, I love, so she was in case you didn't hear from the screen, that both with Dorothy and the kind of childlike, sort of like whatever, wonder, and with Israel, she really believed that there was a place on the other side of the rainbow, like that it was credible, and it made you believe that it was possible. With Josh Groban, as beautiful he is, as much you like him, she didn't believe him at all. And so I do think, and I do wonder if part of that is the setting. You've got this like concert setting with the full orchestra and the crystal chandeliers, and he's kind of singing it like a song, not like a scripture prayer, right? It really felt very different, right? And I think that's part of the difference there that I was picking up on also. And he doesn't need a rainbow. He's already, we don't know, but yeah, okay, maybe he doesn't need it. Because there are cues from the other two, both visual and otherwise, that make you feel like they are longing for something, and we don't really feel that same longing. Okay, beautiful. Great. Jill.
So I agree 90% with Paula. I mean, we said almost the same thing.
Uh-huh.
But for me, I feel like Judy Garland is longing. I don't know that she has the sense that she's going to get there. Whereas for Israel, we felt he was there.
Great. So with Israel, it felt like he was there. That's interesting and very similar. But with Dorothy, you felt like she had such longing and really wasn't sure she was ever going to get there. And I think that that's really true. Oh, the last line of the song, why can't I? Oh, why can't I? Yeah. And for Israel, it's like, why can't I? Here I am. Right, beautiful. Yes. Yeah.
So with Dorothy, I felt that she needs to actually change her life.
Dorothy needs to change her life. Mm-hmm.
Whereas he's there in terms of physical, which makes the longing to me like more like inward and personal. He has a personal longing that's not connected to his physical environment.
Beautiful. So Dorothy, it feels like she really is longing a different way, and for him, it's like he's already living it. So yeah, it's a very different experience. Beautiful. Beautiful. So you're saying that you really read this as a metaphor for the Jewish people, especially when it was written right around before World War II, and that it was, and by two Jewish men who really saw this, and that they were, praying for a time, and that it hit you in a different way when you saw a rabbi singing it, because in some ways that made it direct, the connection more direct. I really appreciate that. One more comment, Freeman.
I felt that his made it a distinctly American song.
Wow.
The ukulele and the fact that he changed the tune a little bit. He didn't read the sheet music note.
Right, that's right.
Which is also an American thing.
So he made it into an American song. I love that you said that, in part because he took liberties with it. He changed it a little bit, and that's also a very American thing to do. He made it his own. Beautiful. And the ukulele.
And Josh Groban, I thought of Majesty, which goes back to Purple Mountain's Majesty, because it was such a majestic, almost operatic version.
Right. So Josh Groban does such a majestic operatic version. It actually it gave you a totally different feeling of majesty, less longing, maybe more that majesty. Okay, one last comment and.
There's nothing like the Judy Garland version, beautiful voice, but it's very solitary. The song, and I feel bad for Judy. To get out of Kansas. I love because he brought me on the journey with him.
Oh.
I was part of the experience.
Beautiful.
Totally different than the Judy Garland.
So the Judy Garland version he was saying is just, it was a little lonely. He felt bad for her. Is she ever going to get out of Kansas? And with there was a sense that he was taking us along on the journey. And I think it also, the cues, the visuals of you're just seeing all these beautiful children gathering around him and laughing and singing with him, and it just has a very different communal feel to it. So I want to share one. Oh yeah, please go ahead.
I just want, I'll say it fast. I think
Don't have to be fast.
I think that she was longing, of course, wanting to get out of Kansas, like you said, but I think he was acceptance. I think that's what I
Was acceptance.
where he is.
Yes. I love that he's this guy who doesn't wear a shirt and just kind of like is lying in the ocean and having a great time. And there is a real sense of acceptance. Like, it really is, I think, part of why we all feel like he made it to the other side of that rainbow. He was there. Yes. And so I'll share an interpretation and a version, which I'm going to end with for us today. That Tablet magazine, which is a Jewish magazine, I think about 10 years ago, actually voted this the #1 Jewish song of all time, which I thought was really quite a thing to say, because there are a lot of really good Jewish songs. #2 was Hava Nagila. So it was like it was in tough competition, okay? So it was like Hava Nagila, and Hatikva was up in the top 5, but anyway, #1. And at that point, when I saw that Tablet article, I remember thinking to myself, I don't even think of this as a Jewish song. But their argument, which I thought was so powerful, was like, Jews are a wandering people who have always been in exile, and this is the ultimate exilic prayer set to music. And when I heard it that way, I was like, oh my God, that's right. That's what that is. It's like a longing for home for a people. And of course, this was written pre-State of Israel, but it doesn't actually even really matter. It's that sense of like, it's an existential state of like wanting home. Home being a sense of deep belonging and everything else. So that changed my whole perception of the song. And I am a mother, and so she says it's a lullaby. So when I think of it as actually literally a lullaby, I think of it as, I imagine like Jewish mothers over the years tucking their children in and praying that they're going to find a sense of home when they are like, exiled everywhere. And I'll share one story quickly from my own not Jewish mother, but who taught me a lot about what it means to create home. And I remember that when I moved to America when I was only 5, I didn't speak a word of English. And so I entered kindergarten about 4 months after I'd arrived. My English was okay, but not great. But everybody said, "Where are you from?" Because I was clearly not from America. And my response was, "I'm from Korea," because I still felt like I was from Korea when kids asked me. And then I made my first trip back to Korea in 2nd grade, summer. And I went with my cousins to their school, and they said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Korea." And they were like, "No, you're not." And I remember I went to my mother and I was crying, and I was like, "I don't have a home." And she said, "Home is where your people are. Home is wherever you're loved." And so, this is what it is to always to be seeking home and to believe, and my mother really taught me this, that you can create home even if you are in exile, even if you don't know exactly where you belong. So this is the lullaby. So I'm going to sing it. And now this is an homage to Eva Cassidy, who sang, I think, the most beautiful version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. If you haven't heard it, I did cue it up, but we just ran out of time. So I'm not going to play it for you, but I highly recommend, do yourself a favor and watch it. But I'm going to sing my Angela version of the Eva Cassidy version of this. But I want you to think of this as a mother's lullaby to her child, longing for home. Oh, so out of tune. Hold on one second. All right. Good enough for folk music, as they say. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me, somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I? Thank you. Thank you all for being part of this conversation, just letting me share two of the songs that I love the most with you and to dissect them and give me an excuse to do it. It was really such a pleasure. And thank you for being a part of this larger series. I know for many of you, you came to many of the sessions or all the sessions. For some of you, maybe this is the only one you caught, but you can listen to the other ones back online if you want. And maybe, if nothing else, you will take beautiful pieces of music and scripture and understand it as something that is sacred, that actually can help us aspire for beauty, for goodness, for morality, for justice, for community, and that in partnership with some force bigger than us, we can get to a more beautiful place. So anyway, thank you, everybody.